Weedflower, Chapter 6. The next day, the United States declares war on Japan. The declaration was a different kind of shock from the Pearl Harbor attack. Pearl Harbor was like a big noise, and the declaration of war was like a big silence. Sumiko stayed home from school. Since Auntie or Uncle didn't tell her why she had to stay home from school, she decided it was so that nobody would take her POW, or hostage. Also on the radio, she'd heard a governor from another state announce that if any Japs living in California tried to come to his state, they would soon be hanging from trees. Sumiko kept checking out the front window to see if anybody was coming to get them. But all day the road was quiet. Bull continued to work the fields, while Uncle, Jishan, Ichiro, and even Auntie went to meetings with other people in the community. In the early afternoon, Auntie rushed into the house with her face flushed from fear and excitement. Sumiko had been scrubbing the rice pot, but set it down and ran to Auntie. Auntie collapsed on the floor and held on to the side of a kitchen chair. "Auntie!" Sumiko put her arms around her, something she had never done before. She loved Auntie, and Auntie loved her, but Auntie did not like hugs. Auntie liked worrying, and working, and scolding. There was a knock at the door, and Auntie suddenly shot to her feet and exclaimed, "Oh!" She took a pouch from her coat pocket and handed it to Sumiko, hissing, "Hide this." Sumiko didn't wait to hear more. She just ran crazily to her bedroom and stuffed the pouch under her mattress. Her pounding heart quieted when she heard Mr. Hirata speaking in Japanese to Auntie. They were talking about somebody getting arrested. Sumiko couldn't stop herself from lifting the mattress and opening the pouch. All it held was one $20 bill. She pushed it under the mattress again and hurried to the living room, just as Jishan and Uncle rushed in. Nobody paid her any attention. Mr. Hirata looked at Jishan. "The FBI came for my father. They started arresting the community leaders and the Issei yesterday. It's still going on today." Issei meant the first generation, those born in Japan who immigrated to the United States for a better life. "I heard they took the principal of the Japanese school, and they took Isoda-san, because he was the principal of a Japanese school in Washington 15 years ago. They searched his house and found many books written in Japanese. Jishan had once been principal of the Japanese school." Sumiko said, "We have to hide Jishan." Jishan knelt and hugged Sumiko quietly for a moment. Then he said, "I better pack." Sumiko said, "Good, you can hide at Mr. Ono's house." He turned to walk out, moving as if he were very old. He was old, but he'd never walked that way before. She started to chase after him, but he turned and held his palm in the stop gesture. Auntie told Sumiko to clean up the house. Sumiko cried out, "But what about Jishan? Mr. Ono, will you let him hide at his house?" Cleaning was ridiculous at a time like this. Auntie pushed Sumiko toward the kitchen. "I said clean up." "But everything's clean." "Then clean it again." So Sumiko scrubbed the entire house. All that afternoon, whenever she passed through the living room, she saw Jishan sitting in his special chair with his old suitcase on the floor beside him. That suitcase was so old, Sumiko thought it might have come to the ship to America with him decades earlier. "Jishan," she said. Do you want me to rub your foot?" "Just one? You make me unbalanced." He didn't smile, so she wasn't sure if he was kidding. "I can rub both." For an answer, he kicked off his slippers. She rubbed his left foot for a while, then rubbed his right foot in exactly the same way so she wouldn't make him unbalanced. She rubbed his feet in all the magic places that gave him peace. After that, she did her farm chores and cooked a new pot of rice. When she heard a firm knock at the door, she knew it was someone to take her grandfather. She ran into the living room. Everyone was there except Bull, who was probably still working. But nobody answered the door. The knock came harder, and Tak-Tak shouted, "Get the rifle!" Auntie slapped him, then gaped at her own hand as if it weren't attached to her. Tak-Tak stared at her. Sumiko pulled him into her chest and pressed her nose into his hair. Auntie finally answered the door. 2 white men in suits stood on the porch with 2 police officers. None of the men took off their hats to speak to Auntie. One of them said, "We'd like to talk to Masanori Matsusada." That was Jishan. He picked up his suitcase and walked to the door. "I am Masanori Matsusada. We'd like to take you and your son to our office to ask you some questions." "My son?" Jishan appeared to lose his balance for a moment, but quickly regained it. Ichiro stepped forward and called out, "I'm an American. Can you tell me where you are taking them?" One of the men turned to Ichiro. "Are you Hatsumi?" Uncle stepped forward. "I am Hatsumi. May I pack?" "We're running late." And just like that, Jishan, with his suitcase, and Uncle without, followed the men up the sidewalk. The rest of the family trailed along. Sumiko saw Mr. Ono already sitting in the back seat of the car. "Mr. Ono!" Sumiko cried out. As if deeply ashamed, Mr. Ono hung his head and didn't meet Sumiko's eyes. The car drove off. "You shamed, Ono-san," Auntie scolded her. Sumiko knew one of those things that made her different from the rest of her family. One of the things that made her more American than her cousins was that she didn't feel haji, or shame, quite as much as other Japanese did. Maybe because she hadn't attended a lot of Japanese school. All the issei were steeped in the culture of haja. Years ago, Mr. Ono had been mistakenly arrested. The police then were actually searching for a different Mr. Ono, but today Mr. Ono still felt haji over his mistaken arrest. The family just sat in the living room. They didn't even eat dinner. Sumiko couldn't remember ever having not eaten dinner. At one point, Ichiro went and got the rifle, and then they all sat silently, with the rifle leaning on the couch. At another point, Sumiko cried out, "Aren't we going to do anything?" But Auntie just shot her an angry look. Every now and then, Bull looked outside at the dark fields, no doubt concerned about what would happen to the flowers. Nobody even bothered to turn on the light as they sat in the living room throughout the evening. Then a terrible thought occurred to Sumiko. Will Uncle and Jishan be tortured? "I don't know," Ichiro said. That night, Auntie went to her room early and wailed so loudly Sumiko could hear her even though her bedroom was across the house. When Sumiko herself went to bed and pulled the blanket room dividers shut, she examined the items under her mattress. Auntie's pouch, Sumiko's own savings of $6 from occasionally helping on other farms, the receipt book, and the silk scarf that had cost Uncle $4. She felt sick with guilt about the cost of the scarf. She heard the crickets, and she saw that someone had turned Mr. Ono's lights on over the chrysanthemums. Tak-Tak said, "Sumiko?" "Yes." "Uncle taught me how to use the rifle. I can protect you." "Don't talk like that." But she could feel in the darkness that he was about to cry now, so she added, "Thank you. I know you'll protect me." And she knew he would.